Good evening. It is 5 p.m. and I call to order the December 10th. All right, let's try again. Good evening. It's 5 p.m. and I call to order the December 10th, 2024 Board of Trustees Workshop. Do I hear a motion to begin the workshop? Madam Chair, I move we begin the workshop. Do I have a second?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a second? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right, tonight we are meeting for the first of a four board workshops to provide orientation to our newest board members and refreshers for our continuing board members. Tonight's session will be on board governance and the roles and responsibilities of board members. For the past few election cycles, Attorney Andrea White from White & Story has facilitated the session for us. We also have our district administrative team here to take any specific district questions. Ms. White graduated from Clemson University and the University of South Carolina School of Law. Before forming White & Story LLC, Ms. White practiced with the firm of Duff & White LLC for many years, where she represented school districts across the state of South Carolina. Ms. White practices in all areas of school law with an emphasis on issues related to complex personnel matters, the education of students with special needs, policy development, and board superintendent relations. Ms. White also has significant experience representing school districts in state and federal courts. She is a frequent speaker on educational topics at various conferences sponsored by the South Carolina School Boards Association and the South Carolina Association of School Administrators. And now I'll turn it over to Andrea White.
Thank you. Ooh, that's really loud. Can we just do it without this?
recommendation of the superintendent. You also have not only the authority, but also a duty to visit public schools. Now, there are procedures in place in your board policy that talk about how you go about doing that, right? How you go about visiting schools. Because when you go into a school, you are automatically seen as what? You're seen as a trustee, and you're seen as being one of the bosses, right? So if somebody shows up in a school and the principal doesn't know that you're coming, that's a problem. The principal should know that you're coming to visit the school. The superintendent should know that. So there are procedures in place. You can't just go show up on a school campus. Now, some of you, no doubt, are parents and grandparents or aunts and uncles of children in the school. And when you are visiting as a parent or a grandparent or some other family member or spouse of somebody, you still need to let the superintendent and the principal know that you're coming, because you can't just take off your trustee hat and say, today I'm not going to be a trustee, I'm simply going in my role as a parent or in my role as a spouse. But because you are a trustee and you're seen as that within the school, you do need to let the principal and the superintendent know that you're coming. So, yes.
Well, Mr. Rice, but the rest of us have children in the schools. So you would want us to call you anytime we're going to be a parent? I'm seriously asking that.
That is an internal.
That would be a lot.
Internal question. I would recommend it, but it's not in the law.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking about how you might be perceived, but I'll defer to Jarita on that.
Collegial enough here that our principals differentiate why you're there. But if something happens while you're there that puts you in the role of trustee, we would certainly like to know it.
Now, that's a good point. Yeah, some districts, some boards I talk to, they're popping in all the time to visit their grandchild, and while they're there, they're taking the opportunity to go walk around and check what's going on so they can go back and report to the superintendent. And that's where there's a problem, right? You're going for one reason, and then you expand upon that reason, creating some issues. And so again, getting into some more of these, you have the authority to transfer and assign pupils. Where that really comes into your purview is where you're looking at changing attendance zones. You know, y'all don't get into the weeds of deciding, is this student better served at this school, or does this student need to be at the alternative school or in another school? That is the purview of the administration. But, you know, y'all get involved when it's things like, changing attendance zones or looking at children who might come in who aren't residents of the school district, and there's things in policy that talk about that. So again, that's where you would get involved in setting the policies and then acting pursuant to the recommendation of the superintendent, and prescribing conditions and charges for attendance. That tracks along with what I was just talking about, and establishing the annual calendar. That is something else. Again, districts do that different ways, but ultimately, y'all have the authority to approve the calendar pursuant to what? Recommendations from the superintendent. So let's start getting into some details. So if you take a look at your district policy manual, and let me ask you this, have any of y'all done that? Have you sat down and started looking through your board policy manual? Good, because that is what governs how you do your job as trustees. And so it's really good to have a general familiarity with that. And in particular, Section B is the section that talks about trustees and the role of trustees. And policy BBA states what your functions are, and it drills down to say that you have legislative and policy-making authority, review and adoption of policies, and in my opinion, that is the most important role that you serve, right, is to adopt policies and then hire a superintendent, which you've got in place, who implements those policies. But y'all come up with the policies pursuant, again, to what? Recommendations from the administration. Now, does the board have the authority to develop policies on its own without a recommendation from the superintendent? Yes, the board does have the authority to do that. However, having seen that in action in other school districts, that doesn't always work out so well, right? Because a board member will have an idea about a policy, and if you've got a board member who is particularly loud and vocal and aggressive, the rest of the board is like, we'll just adopt this policy to get this person to shut up. And the superintendent has tried to say, we think this policy is problematic, and here's why, and it gets implemented, and sure enough, it creates a problem. So that's why I say, yes, you have that authority, but I can think of very, very few cases where it would be appropriate to do that. Because to me, that would be indicative of what? There is some kind of lack of harmony between the board and the superintendent if the board feels the need to go and develop and adopt policies on its own. Executive, your chief executive officer is who? The superintendent, right? So it's much like, even though school districts, of course, are not businesses, and school board members tend to be more involved than, say, board members of a not-for-profit or a profit company, nonetheless, you hire a chief executive officer, and that is the person who is to run the school district and to carry out the day-to-day operations of the school district. And who is the only employee that you all hire? The superintendent. And who's the only employee that you supervise? The superintendent. The superintendent is ultimately in charge of all the other employees of the school district. You are only in charge of the superintendent through hiring them, evaluating them, and providing them with suggestions for improvement as appropriate, right? Probably the most important thing that a school board will ever do is to hire a superintendent, because that sets the tone for the entire school district. Quasi-judicial, this is a very important role that you serve, and so you are in a position to hear appeals of parents. I don't know why that says pupils or students. It should say parents, employees, and students. And we'll talk in some more detail about that. But you serve as basically as a judge and jury when certain matters come before you. And you have to make decisions on those matters in your capacity as a trustee. And we're going to talk some about common pitfalls and where there are problems, but that is an important role that you serve. And some of the things I'm going to tell you about things that you should not be doing are because of your duty, your quasi-judicial duty to sit in on appeals, again, of parents, students, or employees. You have the authority to evaluate the policies of the school district, and that is something that you should be doing on a regular basis, is reviewing your policies or directing the administration to review your policies to make sure that they stay up to date and that they are consistent. And no doubt y'all are a member of the South Carolina School Board Association's policy service, and they do a very good job as far as keeping up with new laws and regulations and issuing policies for consideration by trustees. And then you've got Mercedes as your counsel, who then takes those policies and she makes certain that they fit in Lexington School District 1. And y'all, I was just looking through your policy manual getting ready for tonight, and y'all have done a very good job in keeping up with those policies. Got some districts that I work with, and I'll find policies from the 80s, and I'm like, what? And then it's inconsistent with a policy in another section, so it's important to keep up with all of that. And of course, as far as your operations, it's your duty to conduct meetings, elect board officers, and adhere to state laws and DOE directives, and then you adopt the budget. You also establish educational goals. You approve employment of professional staff upon the superintendent's recommendations. We talked about, final authority for operating schools and visits to schools. And public relations, I want to talk about this one for a minute. You have a responsibility to keep the public informed about what's going on in the district. In most cases, it is the school district's public information officer who does that communicating with the public, right? But on occasion, you will, as you continue in your service as a trustee, you may be called by a member of the media to ask questions about some action that the board has taken or something that might be coming before the board. And in most districts, and that's probably the case here, your chairperson is the designated spokesperson for the board. And I encourage board members to allow the district's public information officer and in a secondary role, the chair, to be the ones to communicate with the media. But I can't tell you don't have the authority to communicate with the media. And why is that? Because y'all have the right to what? Freedom of speech, right? And, I've had over the last 30 plus years, I've had numerous discussions with trustees about, well, I have the right to talk to you however I want to. And I've said, well, that's true, but you need to think about how your comments are going to impact not only you, but also all the other trustees and the board as a whole and the school district, and to be very cautious about what you say to the media. And if at all possible, avoid talking with the media. I actually, when a media outlet wants to speak with a board chair, I generally advise the board chair release a statement as opposed to agreeing to an interview. And the reason for that is in an interview, you don't have any idea what questions you're going to be asked. And you might think that you're going into this interview to talk about the bond referendum or, whatever topic it is. And then during the interview, the reporter starts asking you questions about some scandal that's been in the paper, involving one of the schools and whatnot. And then you're caught off guard with that. And so I despise talking to the media. I do it when I have to. But I'll generally issue a statement as well, because you just don't want to back yourself into a corner with a reporter. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things here that are extremely important and also can be pitfalls. And this is another policy in that B section, policy BBAA. Number 1 here. All powers of the Board of Trustees lie in its action as a group, and the board functions as a whole. So let me ask you this question. What authority when y'all leave here tonight after this workshop, and you are at the grocery store, you're at work, and you're asked a question by one of your constituents, well, what are you going to do about blah, blah, blah? What authority do you have as a trustee to assure that person that you will take care of whatever their concern is? 0. Right? Because you only have authority to act when you are sitting in a duly called board meeting where we've complied with FOIA. So, and I'm sure you get those, or you will if you haven't gotten them, you'll get those inquiries. Well, tell me, what are you going to do about whatever this person happens to be upset about? And the best thing for you to do, in my opinion, is to say, I am one trustee, and I understand your concern, and if, what you're telling me, if that's accurate, I agree, this might be something that we need to discuss, but I have no power as an individual trustee. And, at the appropriate time, this matter may come up for discussion, but I can't make any promises to you. I can't share any confidential information that I might have with you because that, I don't have any power or authority. And that's a good way to kind of shut down a conversation. It also may come up where you have a neighbor or a friend or even a family member whose child has been recommended for expulsion, and they're going to want to talk to you about that. Well, let me tell you what really happened here. My child has been recommended for expulsion, but they didn't do it, or there were extenuating circumstances, and I want to tell you all about that so that you can then, as my board member, because that's what I elected you, you're my board member, and so that you can take care of it. Well, what do you tell somebody who's telling you that? Exactly. Getting back to that quasi-judicial role that you have, you share with them, look, I don't even want to hear this. I feel your concern. I know as a parent, blah, 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 some reassuring words. But if I was to sit here and listen to you talk about that, if this matter comes before the board, then I would have to recuse myself, right? And so it's a polite way to say, please don't talk to me anymore about this. Same thing with an employee. If they want to say to you, well, my cousin's niece is an employee in the district and she's been recommended for termination, just shut it down. The board will handle administrative services through the superintendent. That's another way of saying who runs the school district on a daily basis. The superintendent, right? That's repeated all through policy. And this last one is also important. The board will not give orders to any subordinates of the superintendent, publicly or privately, but may make suggestions and recommendations. Who are you making those suggestions and recommendations to? The superintendent, right? So you all should not be, and again, I'm approaching this and giving this information to you as far as school districts in South Carolina. Y'all may have some internal things that are different, but generally speaking, board members should not be calling the finance director and saying, hey, I need to ask you some questions about some information that's in my board packet, or I want to come sit down and talk with you about that, without running that through the superintendent. And the superintendent may say, yes, that's fine. If you have a question, I'm happy with you sitting down and talking with that person. But you should not be the one to, because that person, that employee, is going to feel compelled to talk to you, right? Because again, they see you all as ultimately their bosses, and that you have the authority to hire or to fire them, which you don't unless the matter is before you pursuant to a recommendation from the superintendent. But just, avoiding, and that would be the case even if you run into them somewhere and you say, hey, can we step over here and talk for a few minutes about some questions I've got about finances? That's not appropriate. And again, y'all chime in, Jarita, if y'all do something differently here. Okay. All right. So let's go through what some of your specific duties are in each of these areas. So first of all, general areas. You establish policies, you approve a planning process to include stakeholders in developing a comprehensive plan for student achievement, because that is what? That is your main goal. And if any of you are on this board for reasons other than maintaining and increasing student achievement to see that all students are successful, then you ran for the board for the wrong reason. Now, I'm not saying that there are other things that aren't important, right? Like the building program and taxes and millage, all that is important. But your primary goal should be students and student success, right? And everything that you do should have as its backdrop student achievement. So that's very important. You invest the superintendent with powers and duties that she has. You require professional leadership from her. And this is important as well. You participate in educational conferences, workshops, training, and professional organizations. In fact, South Carolina now requires, it used to not be this way when I first started practicing, but school board members are required to complete new board member orientation, which is what you will be doing in February. And I encourage you to go and to ask questions, and also to use that opportunity to talk with board members from other school districts, because I think the more that boards can talk to other boards about what's going on in their district, particularly districts that are similar in size, demographics, all the different things that go into making up a school district, you can gain a lot of knowledge at those conferences, not just from the speakers, but from other trustees. Policy. You clarify for the superintendent the intent of the board and the actions necessary for implementation of board policy. You establish it, she implements it through her staff, or he soon. So that's how that works. And you review and evaluate board policies on an ongoing basis, and you set expectations for students, staff, and the community through policy development. Meetings, that's where you get your business done, right, is sitting in meetings. And those of you who are new to the board, I guess, is this your second meeting? You were sworn in, and then this is your second meeting, right? It's actually your first. Okay, wow. So, and I said this earlier, all duties imposed upon the board are performed at a public board meeting, right? And I want to talk about a number of things with board meetings, and you'll hear more about this in February. How many people have heard of executive session? Those of you who are new on the board, right? So state law provides, and this is in Title 30. I told you Title 59 is the one that has all the school laws in it. Title 30 is where you can find the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. And the Freedom of Information Act sets forth when board members can meet in executive session, which basically means in private without the public having the right to be in there. And over the years, there have been a number of court decisions defining when executive session is appropriate and when it has been abused. And the South Carolina courts are very, what's the right word? They're very supportive of transparency and openness with regard to the operation of all public bodies, including school districts. And Jay Bender, some of you may have heard of Jay Bender. He's been around a long time, and he is a lawyer for the South Carolina Press Association, and you'll see him quoted a lot in articles, about FOIA and different abuses. And it's his opinion, and he and I have argued about this over the years, but that school boards are the public entities that violate FOIA the most, particularly with regard to the use of executive session. Frankly, I think that's because the public pays attention more to what's going on with school boards than they do with county councils and so forth. People are more interested, and so that's why it may appear that that's the case, but I think everybody's equally guilty as far as not necessarily complying with FOIA. So one thing I want to say about executive session is, and let me ask you this question, is it necessary to have an executive session at every board meeting? No, it's not. And I think that traditionally, school boards in setting their agenda for meetings have always put an executive session on there. Sometimes they have two, one at the beginning and one at the end. And what does that convey to the public? That we're trying to do things behind closed doors and in secret. And that's a problem. Now, certainly there are times when an executive session is not only lawful under the Freedom of Information Act, but also required to avoid sharing information, confidential information, say related to an employee, that if that was known publicly, could create a problem for that employee. And I really think that boards go into executive session for the right purposes as stated in the motion, whether that is a matter involving the employment of an individual, whether it's involving contractual negotiations, say to purchase a piece of property, or it's to discuss safety and security, or it's to receive legal advice, although I want to talk about that one a little bit more because I think that one gets abused as well. But what I see happen, having gone to probably thousands of board meetings, is that the board gets into executive session and we talk about whatever it is that was, the reason to go into executive session. And then a board member says, well, while we're in here, I want to talk about something I heard about the assistant principal at Lexington High School and tell you what my neighbor told me about what's going on at the school. Is that appropriate? No. And it's not appropriate to say, but you said we were going to talk about personnel, so this is a personnel matter. But no, that's not the personnel matter that we went in there to discuss. And it's called executive session drift. And it happens quite frequently, unfortunately. And all it takes is for one member of the board who is in there and realizes that happened to say something to somebody, and then next thing you know, you've gotten a FOIA lawsuit over the abuse of executive session. So it's really important. And if I happen to be at a board meeting and that happens, I will say something. But most of the time, you don't have lawyers at your board meetings, right? So it's up to who? It's up to the chair, right, to say, y'all, we didn't come in here to talk about that. We're talking about this, so we need to just leave that alone. So that's just something to keep in mind as far as the use of executive session. Does anybody have any questions just in general about that at this point? Okay. So the board establishes through policy the operational guidelines for that meetings. And what that means is things like, do you have the ability for somebody to participate via Zoom or telephonically if they can't be at the board meeting? Do you have proxy voting? I mean, all of these things, because people don't think about those things until all of a sudden there's an issue. And it's important for every board member to be at a meeting based on the topic, and that board member is on vacation somewhere. And then looking at, well, can they participate via Zoom? And so you need to make sure that that's covered in policy, these things that might happen. The board chair, in consultation with the superintendent, develops the meeting agenda. So your meetings are meetings of the board, but how are you going to know what needs to be talked about unless that's done in consultation with the superintendent? Because she or he is going to share with you, these are certain things that need to be on the agenda and things that we need to discuss. And then, of course, board members also might have things that they wish to be on the agenda. And let me ask you a question here, because this sometimes is a problem with boards. How do y'all work it if, say, one of your board members wants something to be on the agenda? It's a topic that's near and dear to their hearts, and they want it to be on the agenda. Do y'all have a process in place for that? Okay. So everybody then has the opportunity to be able to do that. There was just something else I was getting ready to ask you about that piece. It'll come back to me in just a minute. And then the board identifies for the superintendent the information needed for decision-making. What does that mean? The materials that y'all need to, keep hitting that y'all need to see in order to be able to discuss and then vote upon items that are on the agenda, right? And then the superintendent with his or her staff gets that information to you. And board members receive their agenda materials in adequate time for study before scheduled board meetings, right? And I urge all of you to, and y'all probably get it, what, 3 days, 4 days? Okay, so you've got then plenty of time to do what? To read through that information. And if you've got questions about anything that's in there, to do what? To reach out to the superintendent and ask a question about, well, I'm not understanding this, or I thought this, or I think we might need some more information about this. So don't wait until the board meeting. And when there's discussion about whatever the agenda item is, start flipping through your materials then, and then raising questions, right? Because what are you going to do? You're going to tick off all the other board members who have studied their materials and who have come to the board meeting prepared to have those discussions. And it also puts the administration in an awkward place because you're making it look like the administration didn't do their job, but they thought that the information they provided was what the board wanted. And now all of a sudden it's become, well, we need this additional information. I can't make a decision. And so that item gets kicked down the road. And so just please make sure you read those materials and you reach out with any questions before the board meeting. Budget and finance, y'all have a big role with that. You establish priorities for the financial management of the district. You approve the decision to ask voters to pass a bond referendum. You provide the superintendent with the board's priorities in the development of the budget. You authorize, we have to have an annual audit, and you review the budget and you make adjustments as needed. But who is it that prepares the budget? The staff, right? Now, again, y'all give them priorities, things that you'd like to see, and then it's incumbent upon them to come back to you with a budget that y'all then have the opportunity for input into. And then, of course, you have to have public hearings on the budget as well. I've only seen over all the years I've been doing this, a few people show up for that, but we're required by law. We're required by law to do that. Instruction, again, the very most important thing that we all do in the field of education. I'm not going to read all these. I mean, you regularly review student achievement data. You report to the community how things are going in the district. You adopt graduation requirements. And, of course, y'all get professional staff like your assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction and directors to come in and give presentations to you all on how things are going in the district. Personnel. This is, I will say, the area where if a trustee is going to drive out of their lane, it's in the area of personnel. Because, y'all are a larger school district, and how many students do y'all have now? Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty big. Y'all aren't one of the largest, but nonetheless, you're a good sized school district. In some smaller school districts, everybody on the board has a relative who works in one of the schools, usually more than one. And so obviously that can create a big problem. I don't know if any of you all, and I'm not asking you to tell me, but some of you may have relatives who work in the school system, which might be one of the reasons that you became a board member, because you became interested in education. But it's important for y'all to remember that I used to do a presentation called Why You Don't Hire the Football Coach, right? And because that becomes even more important than the hiring of the superintendent, right? It's interesting to me, but that's the way that it is. But, and I struggle some with trustees who want to be very involved in personnel. I'm like, why would you want that headache? Wouldn't you want to be able to say, I'm sorry, that's not my job? If it comes before me, as far as a termination recommendation or an appeal or whatnot, then I'm involved. But that's why we hire the superintendent, and that's why the superintendent hires principals and teachers and directors. That's not something that I get involved in.
Can I ask a quick question on that? I've always wondered, why then do we have to rubber stamp, if you will, or approve? You know, we have this wonderful staff over here that do that for us, and they hire great people, and so then why does the board have to approve the hiring part? Because
state law says that you do.
state law. Okay.
Yeah, that the statute that we started talking about at the beginning, 59/1990, that says that is your job. And I will tell you that in a number of situations, that has actually saved school districts from getting into a situation with a hire that was not in this district, but that was not appropriately vetted by the administration. And where and y'all may have it in this district as well. Does the superintendent have the authority to offer contracts contingent upon board approval? Right. And a lot of, because the hiring for teachers is so competitive across the state, a lot of boards give their superintendent the authority to offer contracts, right, to personnel. But it's important to say with board approval, because again, there have been cases where superintendent offered a contract and then it was determined that the person that was offered the contract, there had been no SLED check, and that person actually had a criminal record that would call into serious question their ability to serve as a teacher. And in one case, the person who had been hired, after they were told, no, I'm sorry, we're withdrawing the contract, and they hired an attorney and sued the school district over it. And the district was saved by the fact that no hiring of a certified person is final, and the contract is not valid until the school board approves it. So that's why you have to do it. So again, that is based on the recommendation of the superintendent. And I have seen boards try to hire employees outside of the recommendation of the superintendent and say, well, you know, I'm going to make a motion that the district employs so-and-so without the superintendent making that recommendation. And a lot of these stories are out of one school district. You know what I'm telling them? It's pretty interesting. But, you know, there was nothing in state law that specifically says that the board can't do that. But there's all kinds of reasons why that doesn't work. And so the board in this particular district eventually backed off. But, and again, what does that indicate if that happens? There has been a serious breakdown of trust between the board and the superintendent. And it should have never gotten to the point where the board was like, I don't care what you say, superintendent, here's what we're going to do. Now, does the board have the right to vote down a superintendent's recommendation? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's majority vote, right? And so if that happens, what does the superintendent do? What should a good superintendent do? Come back with another recommendation to the board. I have seen superintendents say, well, I'm not doing that. I am going back to them with the same recommendation, and they'll just have to vote on it again. And I said, well, I don't really think that's a good idea. And it wasn't. And the superintendent, you know, left shortly after that. But y'all do have the authority to vote down a recommendation and say to the superintendent, come back to us with another recommendation. And, you know, that could happen. I mean, you could vote them down again until ultimately y'all approve whoever it is that the superintendent is recommending.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I understand, I don't think any of us want to get into the day-to-day hiring and stuff, but we do hear from the people. So is there anything wrong with us giving concerns to the superintendent about, say, a principal, assistant principal, that we're hearing a lot of concerns from constituents and stuff?
No, and you absolutely should be doing that. That's who you should be sharing your concerns with, is the superintendent. Because, no, if you hear, because all of y'all are out in the community, right? The administration, y'all all have jobs and families and, you know, social activities and churches that you attend. And I think sometimes the administration is in somewhat of a bubble to some degree, you know, because they know what's going on in the community, but y'all know better what's going on day to day in the community. So if you hear something, and that could be whether or not it's a prospective hire, that you know that the superintendent is in the process of interviewing, and like for a big job, like a principalship or whatever, and you've heard something negative about someone, share it with the superintendent. Absolutely. Same thing with current employees. If you hear something, then let the superintendent know. What you don't want to do is go investigate that on your own, okay? And again, for any one of a number of reasons. If you are out investigating a report of employee misconduct, first of all, you're getting out of your lane, right? And some people say, well, what is that? You know, so what? So I get out of my lane. What can the ramifications be? Depending on what you're doing and who you are talking to, you might be opening not only the school board and the school district to litigation, you might be opening yourself up to litigation for what? Defamation, generally. Maybe civil conspiracy, depending on, you know, who you're talking to. And you all generally have protection from liability as school board members, right? And the district carries, y'all are with the trust, right? The South Carolina School Board Association, the School Board's Trust, a lot of school districts have their liability insurance through the trust. And so long as you are acting in good faith and within the scope of your job responsibilities or your position responsibilities, right, as an elected official, then if you're sued, whether it's in your individual, because sometimes lawyers will sue you in your individual capacity and your official capacity, which is basically just to scare you is what that is. But the trust will come in and provide you with an attorney and provide you with a defense. But if you're out doing something, particularly you've been told not to do that, and you're out doing that and you get sued, the school board's trust is going to say what? You're on your own, right? So share those concerns with the superintendent, and then if you as a trustee believe that the superintendent is not handling that appropriately because you're continuing to hear concerns, then what do you do? What do you do with that? Right. And perhaps it becomes a discussion with the board, right? And something else I'll say here too. You know, y'all evaluate the superintendent annually, right? Using whatever instrument it is that the board and the superintendent have agreed on. I am a proponent of not waiting until that evaluation. If you've got concerns about the superintendent and his or her performance, go ahead and get those out in the open and discuss those so that then the district hopefully can move forward cohesively, right? Because if you wait till the evaluation, that's not fair to the superintendent, but it's also not fair to the board and the school district, right? And so have those discussions. I've had board members say to me, well, I'm just waiting. You know, that this is number 10 on my list of reasons why I want to. And I'm like, what are you doing? You know? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. This isn't supposed to be an us and them and whatever. So share those concerns. You know, I would say start off with, you know, you go to the superintendent, you share the concern, and then you're still hearing things. You go back to the superintendent and say, hey, you know, I had this discussion with you. Can you just let me know, you know, did you handle it, or is there something else I need to know? And then if you're rebuffed, then I would say you have a discussion with the board and then have a discussion with the superintendent. You adopt policies on the evaluation of personnel, but the superintendent is the one who actually evaluates personnel. The only person you evaluate is either Jarita or Keith. You receive an act on personnel recommendations from the superintendent, and you annually conduct the superintendent. And in my opinion, when you're doing that evaluation, you use both objective and subjective criteria. I think that's important. We could talk for hours about superintendent evaluations, but that's all I'll say about that. Community relations, you are a liaison between the district and the community. You actively participate in programs that build good community relations. Do y'all use committees at all? Committees of the board? Ad hoc or standing? Ad hoc, yeah. That's a lot better than standing committees. I'm not a fan of standing committees. You look to the district spokesperson to deal with the news media or the chair, as we were talking about earlier, if that becomes necessary. And you channel complaints or grievances through the established channels, right? You don't take it on yourself to go out and handle something.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
I'll start you really quick. As far as the evaluation for the superintendent, our previous board chair had come up with an instrument that was quite lengthy, and she's herself at least this year, but maybe even last year, said this is not effective. It's just very long. And so, is there one that you would recommend, an instrument that you would recommend?
There's all kinds of instruments out there, and my guess is that your superintendent's contract, because most superintendent contracts are pretty consistent, says that the superintendent will propose to the board a particular evaluation instrument, and then because the superintendent really is in a best position, right, to gather instruments from different places and then present it to the board, but ultimately it is the board's final authority to select that evaluation instrument.
Right.
But there are a number of different ones out there.
Okay.
And again, as I said earlier, I really think that it needs to be subjective and objective criteria.
Okay.
Objective criteria obviously carries a lot of weight, but I have seen some instruments recently with a district that I work with, and that instrument did not provide any opportunity for the board to offer comments on the superintendent's performance in various areas. It was basically, you check this box, this box, this box, and then if you check all these, then you go to the next domain. And I had board members say to me, well, I don't have the opportunity to make any comment about this. All I do is check a box. And I think that's problematic, because I do think y'all need to have the opportunity to make comments, but those comments also need to be linked in some way to what's on the evaluation, as opposed to some random comment about something that happened 6 months ago, right, where you were mad as a trustee over how something was handled. And that's why I was saying earlier, don't let those things wait to the evaluation, right? Go ahead and get those things out on the table, and don't use the evaluation as the gotcha moment. It's not, that's not the thing to do.
So ours are more, I would say, more of a comment than, a filling out. So I would like to maybe implement something that's a little bit less. But my second question is, why are you not for standing committees? We really don't have any, but I know some people think that we should have like a standing policy committee, and we've done away with that because it just seems like a big waste of time from what I can see.
That's what I've seen with standing committees. I think their work can be duplicative of what the entire board is doing. And of course, if you have standing committees and you're having committee meetings, those are all what? Those are all subject to FOIA, and you have to make sure that you notice them appropriately and that you follow all the rules of FOIA. And unfortunately, I've seen committees that aren't doing that, and it's creating a FOIA problem for the district. But the big thing I think is it just creates all these meetings, and it has to go back to the full board anyway. And so why are you having these standing committees? I just don't think it. I think ad hoc committees are great. If there's something that you're studying and you need to have some people drill down on it more, but otherwise, I just think they're kind of a waste of time, honestly. Okay, student services. You, of course, adopt policies that talk about admission, attendance, rights and responsibilities, discipline, and then you adopt policies necessary to assure the safety and health needs of students. You will only get involved in student expulsions. Y'all don't hear student suspensions, right? Student suspensions stay at the building level or maybe at the district level with the district hearing officer, but suspensions do not come to the school board here.
Expulsions don't come to us either.
Tell me about that.
We have a hearing officer.
And most districts do. They have.
Do you want to tell?
Yeah. And that's you.
Yes, ma'am. We do have a hearing officer in this district, and he does hear those initial expulsion appeals. Our appeal process, since the board does not hear it, it does move its way through student services, through the superintendent, to the board as the final appeal.
Right.
So it would be extremely rare.
That's very rare for that to happen. So state law says that a student who's facing expulsion has the right to appeal to the board. Now, years ago, there were boards who wanted to hear student expulsions. And I'm like, why in the world would you want to do that? I mean, that's so traumatic for everybody involved, right? And so I would say probably every district in the state has gone to a hearing officer or maybe a hearing committee. And then the only way it would come to you would be if the parent was not satisfied with the decision of the hearing officer, and then the appeal to the superintendent, and then it could come to you all. And you all don't conduct another hearing. You basically look at the record of what happened before the hearing officer, and then with the superintendent, and then you make a decision based on the record. But that it happens very rarely anymore. And then there also is a policy, and it's kind of an archaic policy, but it's still out there, I would say, in probably every district, where a student or a parent can actually file a grievance with the board over any matter that it's usually stated in the policy. And I've only seen that happen a few times, but just be aware that y'all probably got a policy like that, and that you might have a situation where a parent wants to come and address the board. I had one recently involving the football dispute in Richland too. I'm trying to remember which school it was, where the whole team got disqualified because of the kids that weren't. And so there was a parent of one of those students who filed a parent grievance and came and addressed that with the board. And then the board decided, they actually got me to conduct an investigation into the parents' complaints. So that's rare, but it can happen, so just be aware of it. Food services, this is all basically adopting policies and approval. I'm not going to spend time going through that. Okay, the role of the board and the role of the superintendent. And again, this is in section C, and then the administrative rule in there states specifically that the board will rely on its CEO to provide professional administrative leadership. Again, another nice way of saying the superintendent runs the school district, the day-to-day operations of the school district, and that y'all adopt the policies, but as far as how those policies are implemented, again, that's the superintendent's role. And you expect the superintendent to maintain close working relationships and channels of communication with the district and community. The superintendent's responsibilities, again, we've talked about most of these. The big one is recommending positions for hire. It's her or his job to assign duties of all instructional personnel subject to board approval. And in fact, her contract, his or her contract, mirrors what board policy says. So I just want to throw this out there. If you, as a board, are in a situation where you are not adhering to what your role is and what the superintendent's role is, not only are you not adhering to the board policies that you yourselves, right, have adopted, but what else are you potentially doing? Violating the superintendent's contract, right? Because the superintendent's contract spells out that she or he has the authority to transfer employees, to assign employees to specific positions. And I have had superintendents say, you need to tell the board that if they keep on doing whatever it is they're doing, I may sue them for breach of contract. Now, does that happen very often? No. But it can happen, and just be aware of it. Yes?
I have a quick question. So earlier on like slide 14, under instruction, it said the board would report to the community the status of education in the district. And then on this slide that you just said, the superintendent will keep the board and public informed regarding the district's activities and accomplishments. In your experience, practically, through what means?
Through the annual report. Do y'all do an annual report to stakeholders in the school district? That's generally where that information comes from. The district's website. Board members also, and you see I'm kind of speaking hesitantly here, board members can have a social media presence where they talk about things that are going on in the district, okay? Because of what? Why do they have the right to do that? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I caution trustees to be very careful with that and what you're putting on those pages. If you're basically mirroring on your page whatever is on the district's website or the annual report or whatever, that's one thing, okay? And that's fine. But if you are going out and sharing information on your own about things that you think you know about, right, or that you might have a little bit of information about, again, you're opening yourself up to potential liability, and you're opening the district up to potential liability. And I especially would encourage you, if you're going to do that, if you're going to have your Kathy Henson, Lexington School District 1 trustee page, keep that separate from any personal social media page that you might have, just to keep those two things separate. Because it just can create all kinds of problems, and it'll be pulled out. The school board elections have gotten so ugly in some situations, and people use things that they pull off of social media. So just before you do that, be thinking about what it is that you're posting and why you're posting it, and just be cognizant of that. This is a good chart, and I'm not going to go through it, but it tells you like what the school board's role is in these 9 different areas and what the superintendent's role is. So it's just a good reminder for you if you ever have a question about, well, what is my role as far as personnel? You establish criteria, you approve or reject. It is the superintendent who interviews, recommends, hires, evaluates, promotes, trains, and recommends for termination if that becomes necessary. Should y'all be participating in interviews? I don't think so. I do have some districts where board members are insistent on participating in interviews, and the superintendent did not vehemently object to that. And again, my question is to the board member, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to put yourself in that position? And to me, if you're doing that, if you are participating in that interview, then when it comes before the full board, you shouldn't be voting on it because you participated in the interview. So again, just okay.
I'm gonna try it again. Back to the development of the agenda for the board meetings. Do you more often see that the superintendent kind of pulls together kind of a template or idea of what agendas will be throughout the year generally, and then it's informed or in discussion with the board chair that's kind of items are brought in based on board member recommendation? Or do you see it more heavily the board will make decisions on what's on the agenda items, and then there's just softer control?
I see more of the superintendent preparing those agendas based on things that the superintendent knows has to happen at certain times during the school year, right? Like budget adoption and hiring season and all those different things. In my opinion, even though it is the board's meeting and the board has the right to put things on the agenda and make suggestions for the agenda, it is a sign of dysfunction in a school district where the board says to the superintendent, we really don't. We'll ask you if we need something from you. This is our meeting. We'll come up with the agenda, and then we'll have a little piece on here where you can say whatever you want to say, but we're going to drive the train. So I really think in a good functional district, it's the superintendent who's doing that. And let me ask you this question. Do y'all, is it the board chair and the superintendent, or do you have board officers who do that? Which I think makes the most sense. Some districts have it where it's the board officers and the superintendent who set the agenda. And we had a situation in a district where one member of the board was arguing that that's a committee. And so therefore we had to file a FOIA and actually say that we were having this meeting where the agenda was going to be set, and we had members of the public show up, and I'm like, what are you doing? Y'all need to go back to, yeah, it was crazy, but that did happen. So again, policy BDD again gets back to the board superintendent relationship, and the last bullet on here, you both must have a reasonable expectation of the other, right? That's important. Let me skip over that too. Okay, common pitfalls. Not communicating between trustees and or with the superintendent. That's the most important one. And we've talked about that, how important communication is, and not letting things get to the point where everybody's playing gotcha, right? And getting into a board meeting and displaying to the general public how dysfunctional the board and the superintendent really are. That's a big problem. So if you can keep open lines of communication, that will hopefully keep that from happening. Yes.
Thank you.
They're a little scary.
There does seem to be some perception for some folks in the community in particular that if there's not conflicts may not be the word, but lots of questions and, what about this and disagreement potentially, then you're not being an effective board. And so I think what I hear from you, and I've heard in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you, kind of like you said, you don't want it to be a gotcha moment in the meeting. If you have questions, you're asking before the meeting so that the information that's presented at the meeting, folks are already aware, or there's enough information presented there so that you can make decisions, not get caught up in conflict, if you will. Can you speak on that a little bit and kind of what your thoughts are?
That's a very good observation. Because of course, if you're working things out, which you should be by getting your question answered before the board meeting, then at the board meeting everything goes smoothly because you've already asked all the questions, you've gotten all the information that you need. And so that to me is a sign of a board working effectively with the administration, which doesn't mean that sometimes you might vote against a recommendation because for whatever reason you don't think that's the appropriate thing for the school district. And so I think it really kind of gets into trustees educating their constituents on, look, you don't at the board meeting you see the culmination of what we've been working on as far as studying and getting information from the superintendent, and that if you have questions, you get those answered before the board meeting so that then you can be an informed trustee when you vote. And I think that's really the only way to do it. And then another thing I see too is board members arguing just for the sake of arguing with each other when it really doesn't advance, whatever the point is. And there's no need for being rude or ugly or speaking over each other. And again, that's up to the chair, right, to make sure. And y'all are, I don't work with y'all on a regular basis, but I don't ever see things in the paper about y'all, really. So, which is a very good thing because I work with some districts and I'm like, oh my God, what did they do this time, Exactly, and then state the reasons why you're objecting. But I get what you're saying too, because they're like, oh, you're just a rubber stamp, and it's like, no, that's not the case, And I'm voting what I think is best for the school district based on the information that I've received. But that can be difficult. I just wanted to mention this because this has been going on a lot around the state. Number 2 on here, a trustee who contacts the DOE or the IG. Does everybody know what the IG is? Inspector General, big new thing that we've got. To tell on the district, right, before discussing it with the board or the administration is appropriate. Now, if you believe that there is criminal wrongdoing going on in the school district and that the higher-ups are aware of what's going on and you've tried to get to the bottom of it and you can't get any answers, then by all means, pick up and call and say, look, I've tried to get all this information. They're stonewalling me. I don't know what's going on. But just because you're unhappy with something that's going on in the district, please just don't go call the IG or call the DOE. Public schools are already being attacked enough, right? We're kind of under fire right now. And we don't need to contribute to that view by making phone calls just because we're mad over something. I hate to keep relating personal stories, but I have one board member who's like, I'm calling whoever I want to. You can't tell me I can't call that. I'm like, I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm asking you to please think about it before you do it and have these conversations. Because if you have what I'll call a rogue board member, that creates havoc for the entire district. Please don't let it get to that point. Overlapping roles and responsibilities, that's what we've been talking about tonight. You don't hire the football coach. You don't want to hire the football coach. And that's why you have a superintendent. Let him or her do that. And that way you can say, well, that wasn't my decision. right? It gives you some cover too. And not conducting regular superintendent evaluations that use objective and subjective criteria, failing to carefully craft and follow meeting agendas. That's the other thing too. And it's good that you've got a strong chair here to keep everybody on the agenda, because when you're in a board meeting and you've got a chair who's not a strong chair, who doesn't understand parliamentary procedure, and that's why meetings, you're getting out at midnight. You know, honestly, in my opinion, board meetings should be 2 hours, really. I mean, you know, ideally, because after 2 hours, everybody's what? Tired, and then maybe ticked off about something. And on occasion, yeah, you may have a board meeting that is 3 hours or even 4 hours. I mean, I've sat in board meetings that were like 6 hours. You know, what are we doing? It's midnight. Nobody can think clearly at midnight. And so I would say try to keep your agenda such that it's 2 hours of time. And keep everybody moving on the agenda and understand parliamentary procedure so that you're not, you know, getting yourself into a situation where everybody's just bird walking. And not regularly communicating the board's expectations of the superintendent. We talked about that earlier. Don't wait till the evaluation. So, look, we're doing good. Here, we've got some scenarios. Board Chair Ashley received a call from community member Stephen because Stephen's daughter Riley was recommended for expulsion. Stephen starts going into great detail about what happened and why Riley shouldn't be expelled. He even has the nerve to tell Ashley that if she doesn't fix this issue, he won't vote for her, well, in 2025. What should Ashley do? Stop the conversation. Yep, as soon as the conversation starts, you say, stop. I can't listen to this. I feel your pain. I really, really do. But we cannot have this conversation. Superintendent Michael just learned from his high school principal that there was a gun located on a student in the school this morning. At the same time, board member Andrea was visiting the high school, saw law enforcement arrive, and immediately started posting live updates on her board member Andrea Rock's 2024 Facebook page. You were just talking about this. What should Superintendent Michael do, and what should Andrea do? What should the board member do? Not post that, right? Because what is that doing? What is the purpose of doing that? Getting everybody riled up, and then rumors start. Well, I heard that there was also a gun at this school. And did you hear there was a sexual assault in the bathroom? And once you post something on your Facebook page and people start commenting, how do you walk that back? And then, yeah, I mean, then you have created a situation, and the district is in, you know, is in chaos. But how should the superintendent handle that? Yep. Yeah, very good. So, because y'all have got to understand too, and that the superintendent has 7 bosses, right? And so it puts the superintendent in a difficult position to chastise a board member, right? Now, superintendents, particularly those who are experienced and have been doing it a long time, they are comfortable having a conversation with a board member to say, look, you know, you really shouldn't have done that. Here's why you shouldn't have done that. Here's why it's a problem. But ultimately, it is the board's authority to maintain control over its members, right? And so that's why, as Jarita was saying, letting the board chair know so that then the board chair and maybe another officer can have a conversation with that person to say, we really don't like what you did, and here's why we don't like it. Can the board take any other action other than that with regard to this board member? Yeah, the board has the authority to do what when you've got a board member who is not conducting themselves in accordance with board policy and or state law. You have the authority to censure, right? Use that sparingly. I worked with a district where it was like, I'm going to censor you. No, I'm going to censor you. And it just was, it was a lot of problems. But you do have the authority to do that. And let me just mention something else here too. Do y'all have a policy on board member conduct? Okay. And do you have a procedure in place where if you've got an employee, say, who complains about a board member, that a board member, again, straying out of their lane, goes and does something and it results in an employee filing a grievance against the board member? Because that happens. It does happen. It's happened several times. And if you don't have that, that might be something you want to talk to Mercedes about. Because when it happened in a district that I work with, they had no policy on how to handle it. And so we got through it, but as part of that experience, the board put a policy in place. I know that Beaufort, I'm telling on them now, but that's okay. I know that Beaufort has one and Oree has one as well. Because you need to know, like, well, what do? Superintendent can't investigate that, right? Because it's against a board member, and that's one of the superintendent's bosses. So just something to consider. Yes. Yeah. That can create a whole lot of issues. No. Yep. You're responsible for the comments. You're responsible for the link. And again, social media is great till it's not, right? And I've just seen so many problems result from that. I had a situation with a district where a board member was upset with something and the board member had been a teacher and had retired and then got on the board. And the board member went to the school to talk to this teacher and put her hands on the teacher while she was talking to her. You know how you grab somebody by the arm and, well, the teacher went and made an incident report and threatened to have the board member arrested, and it was a big mess. Same thing, it ended up costing a lot of money to the school district. I would suggest to protect the district too, because here's the other thing. If you've got a rogue board member who is going out and making a comment on social media or actually physically approaching someone and the board doesn't address it, that person's bad conduct can be imputed to the rest of the board. And so I think having a policy in place to deal with complaints against board members or board member misconduct would protect the entire board and the school district. Okay, we're almost done. Board member Tori was a journalism major in college. In fact, she even wrote for the local newspaper before her retirement and service as a board member. Tori has instructed the district's PR director, Mindy, to send her all press releases and statements for review prior to dissemination to local news outlets. Mindy is unsure of what to do because, after all, what if she makes Tori mad and Tori tries to fire her? What advice would you give Mindy? Call the superintendent. And what about Tori? Back off. That's not your role. And I think this is the last one. I have two more. Okay. Newly elected board member Dylan is so excited about his board service. He already attended SCSBA training and wants to dive right in. Indeed, he ran on a platform of finance reform and ensuring the public that he would increase the funds in the district's bank accounts. So Dylan demands that the superintendent allow him to review all the monthly bills and expenditures, and he even directs the superintendent not to pay a local vendor's bill because he thinks it is outrageous. First, do you think Dylan paid attention to SCSBA training? Nope. And second, how would you caution Dylan's approach? And how do you work through the situation as a board? So here's something, and I want to use this scenario to talk about this for a minute. All of you probably have, in addition to your overriding goal of student achievement, right? You probably all have an area of just the business of the district that you're interested in. Like some of you may be more interested in instruction and books and what's in the library and those kinds of things. Some of you may be more interested in finance, different, some of you in buildings and so forth. And you might want to get more information from the superintendent related to that particular area in which you're interested. But what if the superintendent is getting 3 or 4 requests for information from each of you every week? It's going to be impossible, right, to be able to do that. So what I encourage you to do as a board is to decide what information it is you want to get from the superintendent on a regular basis, because I will tell you, superintendents try to honor those requests. They do, and to get you the information that you need, but please be reasonable about it. And the other thing I'll mention here too is if you ask the superintendent for some information, is the superintendent going to share that just with you or with everybody? Everybody. And that's appropriate because the superintendent wants to make sure, even though you didn't ask for that you have the same thing that she's giving to you, right? So just be cognizant of those requests. And if you're asking for something that takes 5 minutes, that's one thing. But if you want the superintendent to go back and research over 10 years, how many times we use this particular vendor, that's getting excessive. And so the superintendent may say, well, I will do that, but I want to know that a majority of the board wants that information instead of just this one person. And that's a reasonable thing for the superintendent to say to you. Last one. Board member Alex is furious with board member Sarah because he thinks that she's taking over the meetings, talking out of turn, and preventing orderly and smooth communication. So Alex emails 4 other board members and begins a conversation with them about Sarah's activities. What are the FOIA implications of Alex's actions? Yes. Yep. That's a meeting, right? That's creating an electronic meeting. And it's easy, I think, to not even think about that when you're hitting reply to all. But when you do that, you're starting a conversation that really should be taking place, what? In a board meeting, okay? So he did that wrong. What should he have done instead? Yeah, and what I would recommend is first, try to have or attempt a conversation with the person who's giving you grief, right? I mean, a lot of times, and this is human nature, like, I'm mad at you, but I don't want to tell you I'm mad at you. I'm going to go tell you I'm mad at her, and I want you to fix it, right? That doesn't work. So try to have the conversation with the person that you believe is hijacking the rest of the board and say, look, I just, I want us to get along. I want board meetings to run smoothly. I want the public to perceive that we are working harmoniously. And here's some things that I think you might want to consider. And then if the person's like, nope, I'm doing my thing, you do your thing, then involve the chair in that discussion is the way to handle it. So, and we are done, and it is 6:35. So, does anybody have any other questions for me? Well, even further away from me. At a workshop, I would think, at a board workshop. And again, when you have board workshops, of course, they're open to the public, but it's more informal, and I think that's a good time to do that. me. They want me to talk to them about the legal implications of a particular policy, right? That if they adopt this policy, what are the different things, or what are my views on how this policy should be adopted? And I've said that's not attorney-client privileged information. The only way that could possibly be considered privileged would be if y'all have gotten threats of legal action if a policy is adopted on a certain thing, then that would be appropriate. But don't use the attorney to try to get around the executive session parameters. Because again, that's something that's being watched by the different lawyers who represent media outlets. So, good. Yeah, and that's great. But if it's, and then just for example, you can talk about employment matters in executive session, but an example of something that would not be an employment matter that's appropriate for executive session would be if you're going to do a salary study, right? That's not something that if you start talking about how it impacts certain people, then absolutely. But if you're just talking in general about we're going to do a salary study and we're going to look at these categories of employees and that's all something that should be in open session. Use executive sessions sparingly. Y'all, and I hope everybody will have a good time now, and you kind of know what to expect in February. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. White, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is just a reminder that our regular monthly meeting will be held next Tuesday, December 17th. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Ms. McCown. Second? Thank you, Mr. Rice. All right. Have a great evening.